the death threats against me were so severe and real, not by Iran, by MAGA, that I had a 24/7, 2-month security detail living in my house, at times in another car outside. $130,000 it costs to provide that protection. And I feel so bad for so many of my journalistic clients, and I've represented the Wall Street Journal, Politico, Daily Beast, the Daily Caller, left and right wing publications and journalists. They get death threats all the time.
Yeah.
And their entities, their employers can't afford to pay for security details. You just got to pray it's not a real threat.
Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. I've got Mark Zaid with me, America's leading national security attorney. He has locked horns with the DoD for decades on issues relating to civil liberties. And that entire time, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but you've had a security clearance because administrations, Republican and Democrat alike, have realized that to do your job, to represent clients, you need to be able to understand the evidence. And you are one of America's most trusted people. I had a top secret TS-SCI clearance. Those aren't easy to get, but yours has just been revoked. Can you give us the backstory on that? I think we know where this is going, but why?
Yeah, and Ken, thank you for having me on. Very much appreciate it. Yeah, I've been practicing law for over 30 years, always outside the federal government, never been in. I'm not a Democrat, not a Republican, been a registered independent my entire life. I represent every level of government, especially as I've gotten older, more experienced, much more senior level, cabinet officers, 2 secretaries of defense from the Trump administration, number 1, national security advisors, congressmen, you name it. And I've had authorized access to classified information since 1996. I make that distinction from a clearance standpoint because some agencies will give us lawyers access to classified information without giving us a clearance. We just sign a non-disclosure agreement. It's for that individual case, and we get access to whatever it might be. I have had a security clearance since, I think, 2002, so almost 25 years, including up to TS-SCI as well, by multiple agencies, Justice Department, DOD, DHS, CIA, you name it. And it is predominantly to, one, perhaps know that my client is a covert case officer from the CIA, and I just need to know their employer, or I need to know what the activity was that they were engaged in. It could be I'm representing them on a security clearance matter, a personnel matter, an IG, Inspector General investigation, a congressional investigation, a prosecution where they're being prosecuted for whatever reason, although that is generally not what I do. I am a civil lawyer. I usually will help people on the criminal cases if they involve classified information, because I'm one of the few private lawyers who had or have, I don't know, a security clearance, at least until Saturday night of this past week when I was out at a friend's wedding, and my phone started to buzz and people started to say, "So sorry, man." And I was like, "For what?" And then I found out that according to the New York Post, my security clearance has been revoked by President Trump. I have received no official notification from anyone in the federal government, so I have no idea if it's true or not. I guess I'll find out the next time I try and access classified information.
I'd love to dive into the actual story, why they're targeting you, but
sure.
The New York Post, right? I mean, is this a strategy? Like, is this how they launch their psyop against folks like you? This is kind of weird, right? To learn from the New York Post.
New York Post. Look, Truth Social tweeting it out, New York Post, whatever, executive order. I represent 8 of the 51 who signed the Hunter Biden laptop letter in 2020. They were the victims the first night of inauguration of an executive order naming them of having their clearances revoked. They still have not been officially notified by anyone in the government either that anything has happened. As you know, and has anyone who's had a security clearance, right? There are there are systems where our clearances are maintained. Now they're called DISS, and scattered castles, which has the SCI component. And there would have to be entries in that system. And as far as I know, there are none. So why did I find myself in this situation? Well, I'll tell you at least what the New York Post reported. And it was that I represented the intelligence community whistleblower in the first Trump administration whose complaint regarding Trump's phone call with Zelensky, the perfect call, that my representation of that individual whose complaint led to Trump's first impeachment, that's why I am untrustworthy. Now, I wasn't the only lawyer on that case. I wasn't even the original lawyer. It was my colleague who did it, who then brought me in.
Can I pause just a second? Are we talking about Alex? Because he's on the show in a couple weeks.
Oh, Vindman?
Yeah.
No, we are not talking. Now, Alex and his brother Yev, now Congressman Vindman, have both been my clients.
Okay.
While I will not reveal who the whistleblower was or is, I will say it was neither of them.
Okay.
They publicly now, but that said, they are both whistleblowers, but they're just not the whistleblower. By it. I helped Alex with his first book, getting it through pre-publication review. That is a lot of what I do for senior government officials, as well as anyone who has a good story to tell, but was in a classified environment. And Congressman Vindman, we still have active representation because we filed complaints, whistleblower complaints, retaliation complaints for him with the Department of Defense Inspector General.
So you got targets all over you. There are a lot of reasons Trump hates you.
But the thing that, and I sued Trump over his hotel. I'm suing him now for January 6th for the estate of Brian Sicknick, the Capitol Police officer who died the next day. I represent other members of the Capitol Police who have been very vocal. Harry Dunn, Aquilino Ganell, they are really the face of the Capitol Police. And then you've got Michael Fanone and Hodges for the Metropolitan Police. Neither of them are my clients. I know them. But so my representation was highlighted. That representation was in 2019 to 2020. By March, whenever the trial was where he prevailed in the Senate, later that year and into 21, I represented the highest level whistleblower, I think, in history, certainly within our lifetime, who was the acting Undersecretary of Intelligence for the Department of Homeland Security. He was blowing the whistle on the acting secretary, Chad Wolf, and the acting deputy secretary, Ken Cuccinelli. And this was a very public case, lots of high-level media attention. We had congressional investigations. We had an IG complaint. DHS in the Trump administration increased my access to SCI. So I had a TS SCI at, a year after the whistleblower case by the Trump administration. But somehow the year before I was untrustworthy.
For the non-nerds in the audience, TSSCI is top secret, sensitive compartmented information, which is not quite as high as it gets, but this is the kind of information that if it gets into the wrong hands, gets people killed, right? This is the kind of it.
Yeah. SCI could be, that's where asset names are and specific operations. I always explain, just to make it easy real quickly, if you have a secret clearance, it's like you have a key to the door of your house, whoever can get in the house. If you want to get into the basement, you need a key to get into the basement. There's your top secret clearance. And then when you go down in the basement, there's a closet door that's locked. That's your SCI access. And that's a limited, and there's, like you said, SCI is not a clearance level in itself. It's attached to top secret, even to secret, though we rarely see it as such. And then there are other compartments that people have access to that have all sorts of cool names, some of which are classified. And those are all compartments. We only have 3 clearance levels: confidential, secret, and top secret. The rest are access compartments. And the more compartments you have, the fewer people, frankly, have access to.
Yeah. Well, the point I'm making is that the government, even Trump's administration trusted you enough to give you access to that kind of information, and you upheld that trust starting in 2002, right? All the way up
Yes,
to your SCI clearance. And then, as
absolutely.
a punitive measure, they leak apparently to the New York Post. That's breaking news to me, that you no longer have it, and you find out when you're out at dinner. What are the ramifications of that on someone like you with your position, with your client roster? And then what is the effect on the larger community of those who have criticized or dared to sue Donald Trump? I mean, surely there is a larger tactic at work here.
There's no doubt. And the list of who had their clearances revoked, if they even had one, like to Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, or Alvin Bragg, the District Attorney of New York. I don't even know if they had security clearances. I think James said she did not. Others who were on that list, besides me, were all Democrats. I think everybody on the list, as far as I know, the ones at least I saw, not only Democrats, but government. And government in a political way at times. I was the only one on that list who's not a Democrat. Not that there's anything wrong with that, as Seinfeld says. Not in the government, never been in the government. Don't. I know MAGA hates when I say I'm nonpartisan, but you don't understand what nonpartisan means, my friends. I don't care who's in office, and I hold governments accountable for ethical and illegalities. It just so happens that the Trump administration has far more than everybody else in other administrations. How does it impact me? It is not going to cause me significant financial harm. I will have more than enough business with everything else to do as this administration continues. It will obviously prevent me, if it's true, from representing anyone in the covert field and having obviously access to classified information. So what's that impact? That hurts the Trump administration, because the people who hire me, and still I have now as clients, are actually people who are in the Trump administration. And I'm trying to help them stay in the Trump administration and do their job. I am trying to help people who might get caught up in investigations, who might get called before Democrats in the House or Senate. I don't have an issue with representing the senior folks in the Trump administration. Some of them I would.
Good.
And I did turn down some in the first administration.
Good to have standards.
I do have some standards. There are some people I would not represent. But most of them, look, if you're just a conservative, I don't care. And if you're even kind of a MAGA type person, I don't really care, depending on how you exercise those views. Who does it really hurt? The regular federal employee who can't get now an experienced, because there's so few of us, lawyers at a reasonable rate, quite frankly, to represent them inside the agencies. And I'll give you one perfect example, because this is really to show how non-political this is. I have been representing for more than a decade victims of anomalous health incidents. The media calls them Havana syndrome. I hate the term. I won't use it, but just so people know what I'm talking about. AHIs. The last 4 years throughout the Biden administration, I have been bringing pro bono, for free, whistleblowers within the intelligence community up to the Congress, to the House Intelligence and the Senate Intelligence Committees, to present evidence of Biden administration cover-up of AHI, who's perpetrating it, how they're being retaliated against, etc. I'm exposing the Biden administration. Now, AHIs are not political. Every administration for the last 50 years has covered up what the Russians, quite frankly, and others have been doing to our personnel around the world and inside the United States. But the last 4 years was obviously the Biden administration. So the cover-up was theirs. They had to own it. And we were exposing that to the Republican members of Congress and staff who I was working with. and the ability of mine to have a security clearance so that the Republican staff and members could just look me up in the system and say, yes, Mark, you can sit in on this interview of your client who's a protected lawful whistleblower, was enormously helpful for the Congress as well as for the clients. Now, that I will not be able to do any longer, and that is unfortunately really sad, because if the Trump administration wants to do the right thing and expose what happened and expose the Biden administration cover-up, I'm all for it. I don't care. Now, I'll help with that.
Hey everyone, it's Ken. I need a quick favor. We are launching Valor Media Network, a new YouTube channel to highlight positive role models who will take on the toxic influencers of the so-called manosphere. Think Joe Rogan. We've got some great hosts already lined up. You'll recognize some of them like Jason Kander, Dan Barkoff, and Bobby Jones. And we've got more coming on board soon. Please click on the link below to Valor Media Network's YouTube page and hit that subscribe button. These early signups make all the difference. Thank you so much. Can we talk about the, I'm sure, intentional cascade effects, the chilling effects of this kind of punitive action? Because it's not just about your security clearance, right? It's sending a message.
No, it's absolutely sending a message. And while I will say there are many, many lawyers, many of my peers, my friends who I've known, people who I have no idea about, are reaching out, wanting to volunteer. We see it in all the cases that are being brought against the administration so far. I would dare say almost every one of them are likely pro bono by lawyers, Democrat and Republican alike. That said, when you see what happens to folks like me, it does send a chilling effect, because some of those lawyers who may need to count on their security clearance because they work in a defense contracting standpoint, or their clients are defense contractors and they're in a big firm where money matters a lot more than it does to me from a business perspective, and they have to make business decisions, it may deter them from getting involved. And I have seen that already, without a doubt. Now, the next thing that I am fearful of is when it will be that someone gets arrested for something, especially a lawyer, or someone, or a whistleblower on the inside. Now that's really going to have a chilling effect, and I dare say, I don't think I have to be so prescient in saying this, but the reality is we're going to see that, and I've said many times, I think it may be a journalist. That there will be a journalist that is prosecuted under the Espionage Act. There's no First Amendment defense. There's no reporter's privilege. As soon as someone writes a story, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, that has classified information that, quite frankly, embarrasses President Trump and his administration, they're going to find themselves charged under the Espionage Act, and they're in a lot of trouble if that happens. And that is going to have an incredible chilling effect throughout the industry.
Yeah, this might be a stretch, but I think it's of a piece of what you're going through when I look at the revocation of security details for people like Milley and Ambassador Bolton. Again, it's sending a message, and it only takes one lawyer getting arrested, or God forbid, one former critic of Donald Trump getting knocked off by an Iranian hit squad, for the entire attitude towards criticizing a president to change overnight.
Yeah, Mark Esper, former Secretary of Defense, was a client of mine. I helped him get his book published. We sued the Department of Defense during the Biden administration, if I remember my dates correctly, to get the book out. He lost his security detail, reportedly lost his clearance as well. I mean, everything is literally just by newspaper articles. Fauci lost his security detail. Now, for those guys, and as you mentioned, Bolton, look, those guys have money. They've made good money on their books. I'm sure they're on boards and things like that. But let me explain to people what that detail frankly means. And by the way, Iran has either attempted or did, I'm trying to remember back, they killed a dissident in suburban DC back in like 1980, 1981. I can't remember if it was an attempted assassination or they pulled it off. But Iran was on our soil doing this before.
They tried to blow up, if I'm not mistaken, the commanding officer of the Vincennes, right, on U.S.
I think
soil.
So. And of course, there was a huge threat against President Trump for back in the summer. I actually represent the former director of the Secret Service who resigned in the aftermath of the Butler attack, which was not connected to Iran. And I represent one of the field agents who was on the ground as part of all those investigations, both of which are pro bono representations, because this is what I generally do to just try and help out career civil servants. But the threat was so high by Iran that modifications were made to Trump's schedules. But during the first Trump impeachment, the death threats against me were so severe and real, not by Iran, by MAGA, that I had a 24/7, 2-month security detail living in my house, at times in another car outside, which was paid for by Whistleblower Aid, my nonprofit, by fundraising. $130,000 it costs to provide that protection. The threats were so real that one guy was actually prosecuted and sentenced to a year in jail. So this is real stuff to people. This is real for money. It is real, emotionally. And I feel so bad for so many of my journalistic clients. And I've represented the Wall Street Journal, Politico, Daily Beast, the Daily Caller, left and right wing publications and journalists. They get death threats all the time, and their entities, their employers can't afford to pay for security details. You just got to pray it's not a real threat. It's just, a drunk blowhard.
This might surprise some people, but generals, the vast majority, don't have that kind of money either.
No.
I know very few who have made it in corporate America after they get out. The rest are going off their retirement and the occasional board comp. I'd be surprised if Millie can afford what you had to shell out for that kind of security.
Not on an ongoing basis. That's for sure.
Yeah. I promised I'd get you in and out of here. We're already over time because we've been on a roll, but I have to ask you about what appears to be an attempt by J.D. Vance to set the stage for open defiance of the courts. We know he's capable of this kind of total disdain for the checks and balances that are written into the Constitution. When he was auditioning to become vice president, he did that infamous podcast where he advised Trump to fire all the mid-level bureaucrats and then said, if the Supreme Court tells you that's unconstitutional, tell them to enforce it. And now we see this trickle of tweets suggesting that the courts do not have the authority to rule the actions of his boss, the president, unconstitutional. I don't think enough people have picked up on this, but this is really scary to me.
It is to me. We, in the aftermath, before the election and after, but before inauguration, have done a number of exercises. You've participated in it with me too, about scenarios. And I said at one how I'd say emaciated I was predicting I would feel, because I was very concerned about what could I do. My strength as being a lawyer and using the law to try and fight misconduct. And, other than that, what am I supposed to do? And what is anybody supposed to do? We can go out and protest, and hey, there is a need for that, and there is an effectiveness to that. But so far, I'm very proud of my brethren who are in the judiciary, who aren't lawyers just like me, but wearing robes now, both Republican and Democrat, who are pushing back against all of these efforts, very successfully pushing back. But my concern is what exactly you're talking about. There is going to come a time, I have absolutely no doubt about it, where the Trump administration just says, as did Andrew Jackson, who I don't think this is a coincidence that this is the president that President Trump emulates, as Andrew Jackson said to the Supreme Court back in the 1830s, whenever it was, to almost 200 years ago, you and what army are going to enforce your decision? And this is where we will go into constitutional chaos. This is where I don't know what to do by way of fight if the courts are disregarded. And they are clearly setting that up, that's what they want to do. I'll give you one easy example, right? Friday night, they fired the special counsel in the OSC, Office of Special Counsel. That is a basically nonpartisan office that enforces and pursues whistleblower claims, as well as enforces the Hatch Act, no politics among federal civil servants. And he got fired all out of the blue, no reason. He filed a lawsuit immediately because he was prepared for that. It was expected. And the judge issued an administrative stay to reinstate him while the temporary restraining order proceedings were pending. It's similar to what we got in our FBI case to block the Trump administration from revealing the names of all the agents and the support personnel. The Trump administration appealed that administrative decision. Like, all it was to do was to keep the status quo while the TRO was pending. But it's already taken it up on appeal, because what they're trying to do is bring a case to the Supreme Court that challenges and pits anyone against the executive branch, whether it's the judiciary or the legislative branch or people within the executive branch, to show that the president has ultimate king-like authority to do whatever that he or she, if it were, wants. I have been starting to say this. We are nowhere near rock bottom.
Yeah.
People think this is bad. We are not there yet. And the two primary things will be executive branch refusal to obey a court order, and will be arrests of those that they view as enemies. Those are the two biggies that are still yet to come.
And they are absolutely setting that up. It probably bears reminding folks that Jackson's defiance of the Supreme Court in the case you cite led to a genocidal forced march of Native Americans out of Florida. That's what happens when you run roughshod over the checks and balances and give unchecked power to the executive. You got time for one more question? Little less serious. Are you still on the board of the Spy Museum? Have you been kicked off that yet?
No. I was at a Spy Museum event last night for H.R. McMaster's, my former client, who his latest book, former national security advisor in the Trump administration, one of several. Now, I love the International Spy Museum. I've been involved with them for 20 or so years. I speak at them often. If ever anyone goes to the museum, there's a giant turtle, which is a Revolutionary War submarine, that I sponsor that turtle. I love that turtle. It's my turtle. It's not my turtle. I just sponsor it. But anyone who's never been, please go in Washington, D.C. It is a fantastic museum. They're very supportive of me as I am of them. So hopefully I won't cause them any problems in the Trump administration.
I hope not. I love the Spy Museum. There's a piece of my former plane. I don't know if folks can see it over my shoulder, during an intercept with a Chinese F-8, and they've got a prop from that plane that the Chinese gave back to us in the museum. So keep helping them out. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining us. I hope we don't have you back here too soon, because if we do, it means terrible things are happening, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, I am always willing to come back on, Ken. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark.